All right, good afternoon. I am with Jason Rowley, former head varsity football coach over at Oakton High School. Won a couple state championships there, multiple region championships, and I'm lucky to call him my varsity head coach. So thanks for hopping on, coach.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here, Andy. So good to see you. I haven't seen you in a few years, so it's great to see you. I love this project that you're working on. So thank you for the opportunity to be here with you.
Absolutely. So I was kind of, touching on why we started this. This is a passion project for me. One of my very dear friends died by suicide in March and kind of shocked our whole community, took us by storm. And I wanted to start an initiative on, hey, how can we make things better? Maybe I can't, change everyone's world, but I want to change my world around me. And I think by having these hard conversations with men, puts us in the right step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's listening to some of your podcasts. I think you're right. I think men have a hard time sort of getting in touch with some of the issues that they need to deal with, and I think this is a great opportunity to express some of those and open it up. So I love it.
Yeah, so our background, you were my varsity football coach. I might have given you a couple gray hairs, so I first want to apologize for that.
You know what? As somebody asked me today, I said I was going on a podcast with a former player, and somebody asked me, I was like, look, this kid started for me for 3 years. He was a great football player. I love him as a player. I didn't always love him. He wasn't always easy to deal with, but I'll always love him. So yeah, it was a ton of fun. I look back on all of your years there with us, it just totally fondly. I so much love those years with you guys back there at Oakton.
Absolutely. We had some fun and you were an awesome coach to play for and we did pretty good, I think. So I think
Yeah,
it worked out.
yeah, yeah. We did okay.
Yeah. So kind of leads me into my first question. So for so many years people knew you as Coach Rowley, whether that was our defensive coordinator or our head coach. When you stepped away from coaching, did you ever struggle with the question of who am I if I'm not coaching anymore?
Oh, absolutely. I sort of have a unique path. I've coached for about 30 years in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County. And, sort of started off as a freshman football coach and worked my way up and eventually became the head football coach. And when I made the decision to leave Oakton, I struggled with that a little bit. I sort of was like, am I ready to leave? And I thought I was. I thought I was done coaching at that point. And, speaking with my wife and even my children at the time, who were still pretty young at the time, but they're like, Dad, you love this. And my wife, you love this, you should continue it. So when I stepped away from Oakton, I decided to take a step back and go to Chantilly High School, where I worked for about 4 years as a D coordinator. And then I took a year off and I stepped away. And again, thinking, I'm done with this. And, for several reasons. And, sort of get back with my family a little bit more and being able to spend more time with them. And I was miserable. And so actually last year was my final year of coaching. I've decided at this point to retire from coaching and I feel really good about it. I feel differently today than I did the previous two times I tried to walk away. It's sort of an addiction. Coaching is sort of an addiction. It's hard to get away from it because you love it so much. But I'm really content with the decision that I made. But in terms of figuring out who you are, I think that's a big piece. I think you know I I think to a lot of people, I'll always just be coach, and I like that. I think that coaching doesn't necessarily define me 100% as a human, but it certainly has played a large role in who I am as a person, and has helped me develop into a good husband, a good father, and hopefully a good friend to others. And I think that coaching, without that, I'm not sure I would be as content as I am today in my life. And I think it has definitely strengthened those that role as a dad, as a husband, and as a a son, a friend. So
Yeah, no, and I think you nailed it. I think being someone that us as players can look to for that guidance, I don't care if it's been 20 years or 30 years since you have last coached, that impact is everlasting.
yeah, I look back. I've had the opportunity to see continue to work against my former high school football coach, and seeing him. I call him, he's my friend now, but he's definitely a mentor for me, and it's always been a mentor. And appreciate everything he's always done and continues to do for me, just in that as a peer and with that peer relationship now today. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I only coached for 4 years or 3 years. It was post college and they were all freshmen when I was coaching freshman football. And, some of the guys from Oakton will still call me coach. And I love
yeah,
that. I love that
yeah.
relationship that was built through football, through sports.
Yeah, I think that there's nothing like it. And I think football in particular is just a different kind of sport. And I think it helps to really build relationships and community. And I think in a lot of ways it builds a lot of community. And I think that's a really important piece, especially right now where we are in our country and our society. I think having community is really, really important.
Absolutely. And then coaches constantly tell players to be tough, push through adversity, keep going. Looking back, do you think there were times when you were preaching toughness while privately struggling with it yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the hard part about being a coach is you always sort of it's similar to being a teacher. You know, I'm a nearly 30-year teacher as well, and so you always put on a show. I mean, you are putting on a mask and you're playing a role, regardless of what you're dealing with on a personal side. I dealt with my parents getting divorced whenever I was coaching, and I've dealt with struggles and illnesses and things of that nature, and family difficulties with extended family. You deal with those things, but I found that the nice part with football, and I used to try to preach this to my players as well, is that during that time at practice, that's a time to set those things aside. You can you can set aside all of the difficulties that you're struggling with, and you have those 2.5 hours of practice, sometimes three, depending on how the day was going, to ignore all of those things and to put them aside and to then just focus on something else. And I found it refreshing. I found having the opportunity to put those things aside and have an outlet, and then I can get back to my real life. And I think that, but yeah, for sure. I mean, struggling, we all do, and we all struggle with all different kinds of things. But I think that coaching for me was definitely a way in which I was able to put some of those struggles aside, and then I always found myself sort of able to recalibrate when I got back done with practice, which I appreciated.
Yeah, no, I think that's is amazing thing we can do as humans to put stuff to the side, focus on the present, and then once it's over, kind of go back to what you're dealing with. But football especially, it was one of those sports where you are able to kind of put yourself aside and live in the moment. And that's why I love football so much because it's every play matters. And you preach that every play matters. I mean, it could be as minuscule as an onside kick or as big as a game-winning touchdown. Every play leads to the big picture.
Yeah, I think that piece, and in terms of the things in terms of coaching for me that I really found later in my coaching career that I really enjoyed was sort of the development of young men. I think that's the thing that I really wanted to focus on. And I think sometimes we can lose that as coaches. Really, that's our job. That's what we're charged with, is really trying to develop young people, young men, into becoming grown adults who are good fathers, good husbands, good brothers, good sons, and the way in which through football teaching that, I think really sort of became my focus, certainly later in the last decade or so of my career. At the beginning of your career, you really think about winning, and all of that is really important. And I think winning is important. I'm as competitive as anybody else, but when you start to shift your focus a little bit as a coach, sometimes you find that there are still wins even when you don't necessarily win on the scoreboard. And so finding that development and seeing that development of young men, I think has really become what I've enjoyed the most as I look back on my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And you coached hundreds of players, young men throughout, and probably seen players dealing with things they never told their teammates or even their parents. What did coaching teach you about how good at men can become at hiding what they're struggling with?
Yeah, yeah, especially with young men at those formative years as teenagers, the last thing you want to be seen as is somebody that has a weakness, and especially in a sport like football, I think that they become really good at hiding things. They become chameleons, and they're really good at just hiding really what's going on with them, and they can shift and change. I mean, I've had players who are dealing with major issues at home, sick parents, grandparents, to small things that are really impactful on them in their life, a breakup or anything. And I think that you can find that they get really good at hiding that, and sometimes it lashes out in other ways. So you might have a behavior issue in school, but in football they're the perfect athlete, but at school they're really struggling with maintaining themselves and keeping up to the standards that we would set. And so I think that a lot of times men in general are good at being chameleons. They're good at hiding sort of their what's actually happening in their life, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunately the reality of being a man in society. You are able to put a mask on, like you were just talking about. Into the outside world, everything looks normal, but internally, you're dealing with personal things. And I think, at some situations it's good, maybe in the workplace, but when you're really dealing with someone on a day-to-day basis, like a coach-to-player relationship, to be able to let them in on what you're dealing with, I think it goes a long way. And I think more players and more athletes should be open to their coaches. And I know some are. And that's just the hope in today's society, because unfortunately, we've seen a lot of even deaths by suicide in the NFL. I mean, most recently, the wide receiver for the Cardinals, I can't remember his last name, but we're talking the highest level of professional football, dealing with internal battles, and the outcome was not great, obviously.
Yeah, I think the one of the unique situations for me is I was able to coach with a coaching staff who had been together for a really long time, and then and then when the head coach who I worked for stepped away and I became the head coach, that core group stayed together, and those relationships that we built really allowed us to share in each other's joys and successes, but also lean on one another when we were really struggling. And I think that that's something that I learned that I take away from football, where it's actually strengthened me. I think this idea of, having to be the tough guy coach all the time. I think, look, coaching, we're coaching a sport that is violent. I mean, it's a violent sport. And I think that, but there are times and moments where those things really draw people together and really can build relationships. Some of my best friends are still the guys that I coached with from back at Oakton. And even when you don't see each other or talk to each other for years, you come back together and it's like, you saw him yesterday. So I appreciate what football has given me in that sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. I think football has a way of making everyone feel incredibly important. The wins, losses, championships, the rivalries. Now that you're removed from it, what did you once think mattered that you realized really didn't matter nearly as much as you thought?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think that one of the things that I think coaching young men to in a tough situation. One of the things that I think matters more than I probably put at the beginning of my career that I tried to focus on. I mentioned was really teaching young men how to become men and what toughness looks like. Toughness isn't running and hitting somebody as hard as you can, but toughness is really getting up in the morning for an 8 a.m. workout that you don't really want to get up for. That's being tough. Like that takes toughness and fighting through adversity. That takes toughness. Dealing with an injury or you're hurt and you got to kind of battle through a bruise or a bump or something like that. We look at those things as being tough, but really it's about getting home after a 2-a-day practice and working that job that you need to help support your family. I mean, that's sort of the thing that I really appreciate in terms of coaching is we're trying to build resilience. So when you are a father and your child wakes up at 2 a.m. and you got to walk the floors while they're crying, like, yeah, that's you built that resilience. Like you're tough enough to do it, and I think that those are the things that I liked to lean on. Like I said, especially later in my career, probably last decade or so.
Yeah, no, I think you hit something on the head that I think I could not appreciate more. My son, a little bit of a sleep regression right now, and those 3 a.m. wake up calls, or sometimes we'd have to beat the heat because it was going to be a code red, and you were like, "Hey, we're starting practice at 6 on the dot, so you got to get here at 5:30 if you want to be on time." And
Yeah,
at 16, 17 years old, I'm like, I haven't been up this early in a lot, probably most of my life, so it was a wake up call, but I think it prepared me for future jobs, because that next summer when I was in college, I was working at a golf course, and what time do we start work? 6 a.m. So I already had prepared my body for that. And I think football in many ways prepares you, maybe not necessarily in a way you think, but looking back, you're like, wow, I learned discipline. I learned leadership. I learned accountability, and I know how to lean on my teammates. It teaches you so much when in the moment you don't realize it, but when you look back, you're like, wow, I really learned a lot.
yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's exactly what we should be looking for as coaches. That's where we're finding our successes. I think that's, especially in today's age, I think that's even more important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. And then was there ever a moment when you realized that being there for your wife and your two children was more important than being there for another practice, another game, or another season, and was
Yeah.
accepting that difficult for you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think my last season at Oakton as the head coach was 2017, and that was a hard decision for me. I didn't it coaching is an ego-driven sport, and especially in high school, if you're doing it the right way, you're just taking the players that live in your community. You're not out there recruiting kids and things like that. Apologize for that. And so seeing a change in community and successes sort of dwindling. I always thought ego wise, I was driven. Hey, we can still win. We can still make this happen. And then I came to the point where like I'm putting in more work and more effort and being a better coach on the field in the years, and we're grinding the way we always had, and we're not seeing the successes that everybody in the community wanted. I came to the point where like I think I need to step away. I'm too involved in this, and it was really hard. It was a hard decision, and my kids were coming of age of nearing high school age, and putting myself in a position where I could be a better father in my career, be in a position where I can help them through their high school days. As a teacher, you don't have many opportunities to really help your kids later in life. I can really help though while they're in school, and so get taking advantage of an opportunity that made itself available to me was really child driven, and my wife and I talked about it, and the nice part is my wife's a coach too, so being able to share in that and share in that decision making, I think was important for us. So yeah, I think in 2017 that was a really important part of like, hey, look, I've done a lot of years of helping people raise their own kids. I probably need to focus and shift my focus back to my own family a little bit at this point in time.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard reality of being a coach, because you have your cup and you give so much to others. You don't want to leave that, you don't want to go home with that cup empty. You want to keep it at least half filled so you have some to give back to your family. So I mean, to the whole coaching community, I think we all owe you guys a big thank you, because you have lives, you have families, you have jobs, and obviously, unless you're at the D1 high collegiate level, you know, you don't do it for the money. You do it for the camaraderie. You do it for the relationships. You do it for the impact. And at that time when you're a teenager, you don't realize like my coach is taking time out of his day to be away from his family to do this. Like now looking back, you're like, wow, like that took a lot for them to just want to go ahead and give back to us. And obviously as a teenager, you're not thinking you're with your head on straight, but looking back, I think it's valuable what we all learned from how much all of our coaches were giving up to just be there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that's our hope. Like you give and you just, and as a coach, you don't often hear about the successes, and as a teacher you don't often hear about the successes of your students or players later on down the road, unless you do something like this where I get to see you again, or where you stay in touch with players. But life happens for young people too, and so it's nice to hear that there's some recognition of that, and there's some growth through the sport in which you loved and you coached, and that was what you hoped to get out of it. So it's awesome to hear that.
Absolutely. And then your daughters will never care about your coaching record the way your players might. When they grow up, what do you hope they say about who their dad was and how he made them feel?
Yeah, I think coaching really helped me be a father, be a better father. I think my kids got to see me be vulnerable after, we come home and it didn't go as well as you hoped, or you had a bad practice, and they would see me on the phone talking to another coach, or talking to my wife about it. And they would see some frustration and some vulnerability, and they would, we're a coaching family. And so I think that helped them understand what it's like to be competitive, number one. And I think, number two, how to deal with some adversity and how to build some resilience. And I'm hopeful that they see me as somebody that was giving. I think that that's the biggest piece that I hope to take away from this. Like I said, coaching is an ego-driven sport, and some of it for us coaches is about us. I mean, if anybody says it's not, they're lying a little bit. But in the same token, if it's all about you and not about giving back, um, for me, my cup fills up, my bucket gets filled when, and my ego gets filled when players have successes. And so I love that. And so I'm hoping that some of those lessons that my daughters saw through football or through dance, as my wife coaches, um, has helped instill in them some resiliency, competitive drive, love for a sport, love for being active, all of those sorts of things. And I think those things are important messages that my kids will take away from me from being a coach.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on the head of something that I personally can agree to is facing adversity. I mean, I could even lean on our senior year. Like we knew we were a good team, but losing 4 games in a row was a wake up call. I mean,
Oh, was
talk
it? Yeah,
talk about adversity. I mean, we were riding highs, undefeated, and then losing 6-0, and still making the playoffs. We're scrambling to try to find our identity, and I think. If there was a time for us to either break or come together, that was that moment. And I think, looking back, that was truly adversity. And those are the defining moments you look and you really lean on and be like, okay, I'm dealing with all this stuff, but like a band of guys that are good friends. They came together and they were able to figure it out for the greater
yeah,
good of the team. And maybe they were out of position playing things they weren't used to, but they figured it out, and
yeah.
that's something that I think is really hard to do, especially in a team sport. If you're talking an individual sport, maybe, a little different, but we're talking a team sport here. And I think, adversity in that moment was huge and we were able to figure it out.
Yeah, you know what I love about that? I love reflecting back on that or talking about that is that we got through that adversity because we relied on each other. You know, as players, you relied on each other. And then you put some trust in us as coaches and said, okay, like maybe I don't love what's happening in this moment, but I'm going to put some trust in you guys as coaches. And we put trust in you as players to do the same. And that sort of symbiotic relationship between players and coaches and your guys' ability to come together to overcome adversity, it's about coming together and relying on others to overcome when things get hard. You have to have people in your life. You have to have people that you can rely upon um, to overcome those tough moments when you're
Yeah.
dealing with it.
Right. And that was definitely a tough moment because, again, we were riding high and then we got slapped in the face with reality, lost a couple games to last second things. And
Yeah.
you guys kept our head on straight. So I think that was the defining moment, especially in our, senior year of all years.
Yeah, it was an awesome thing to see the leadership of that group of young men. And really, as coaches, we put it on you in that playoff run. It was sort of like, hey, man, this is up to you guys. And you really rose to the occasion. It was awesome seeing you guys as young men take hold of what we were trying to accomplish. So
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite in my 30 years of coaching, one of my favorite times to be able to see that develop and come to fruition as you wanted it to. So,
Absolutely. No, it was a lot of fun. And you spent years trying to develop young men into better players and better people. Has being a husband and father exposed weaknesses in yourself that football never could? And what
oh,
have you had to work on personally?
yeah, I mean, I think communication number one. I think that's the hardest part. I'm a pretty uh, stoic person as in terms of communication. Feelings. Push a lot of feelings down. I think being a father and being a husband in particular, learning and developing the skill to be able to say, hey, this is something that has bothered me, or this is something that I'm happy about. Even this is something that brings me joy. Being able to communicate those things, I think definitely a weakness in my personality that I've had to work on over the years. Where in football, you don't necessarily have to, that doesn't get exposed, but as in terms of my relationships, especially being a father of daughters, I think it's important. It's funny. Some of my older teams, my '05, '06, before my first daughter was born, they're like, "Coach, you were so hard on us. You were so hard. You've gotten so soft." And they blamed me having daughters, and I said, "Look, I don't. I think it just it awoken me a little bit to maybe some other things that are of value and importance." And so yeah, I think expressing feelings and emotions has been one of those areas of weakness, and I think a lot of men experience that. And I think and so trying to manage and deal with that, I think, is important. My oldest daughter's going away to college. She's going to be a freshman at JMU here. We take her on Saturday. And so there's emotions there, and being able to talk about it and talk to her about it even and talk to my wife about it and, express some of those emotions. It's still not easy, but I know it's something that I'm working on and you know, uh, and we as men need to do.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on something that I'm also dealing with. I got a daughter and a son. I think my daughter especially, she definitely morphed me into a softer, more loving person. And obviously my friends and family notice it, but it's like that's the beauty of, not only having children, because obviously I think any child would do that to you, a son as well, but a daughter especially, for some reason as a man, you want to not only you want to be the best you can be, but you also want to show your loving side because I think she's moons and moons away from finding her husband, but you want to show her what it should look like and what she'd be looking for.
Absolutely. That's such an important thing. I think it's important for us as fathers to show our daughters what the expectation of your future spouse should be. And I think that that is a critical role as dad for sure.
Absolutely. And if you could stand in front of every coach who believes his team needs him so badly that his family continues to get whatever is left over, what would you tell him?
Oof, I think if you're coming home as a coach and you're spent, and it's not necessarily even just as a coach, but if you're career driven person and you're coming home and you're not able to give back to your family, I think you need to take a step back and reassess where your priorities are. I think that it's funny when I got married and I was coaching, and my wife and I, when we didn't have children, we could focus on our coaching. We could focus. It was an easier balance. We could focus on our coaching and really sort of dive into it. But we also had time to balance our relationship there and grow and develop as a married couple. But then when kids come into that and children come into that, I think, it becomes a harder juggle. And you don't want to, you're not trying to do, my preparation last football season was the same type of preparation I did in 2005 when we won a state championship. I go through the same process. However, instead of taking 12 hours to go through that process, I would try to get it to 5 hours. I became more efficient at it because I needed to close the books and close the computer and stop watching film so I could spend some time with my kids. And I think that's an important balance. You got to learn how to balance it. It's okay as a man to be career driven, but it's also important to understand that you've got a role and a responsibility to your wife to be a good husband and to be a good father to your kids. And I think, if you're not doing that, if your bucket's empty when you come home, you really need to reassess what your priorities are and what you're doing.
No, absolutely. And I think that goes along with a lot of professions, whether you're a coach, a manager at a restaurant, you need to set aside and realize, do I want to work another shift or do I need to make time for my family? I think having that hard conversation internally is not an easy one because as a man, you want to provide and you want to be the best you can be. But at the same token, is making X amount of dollars worth it over your child's future? Because seeing their dad and a present father, and also a loving wife, knowing that you're there, I think goes far beyond dollars and cents. And I think in today's society, we're so focused on the next move, especially in the United States. Like, what's our next move? How can we make an extra buck? But at the same token, a child doesn't, all they want is a normal childhood. They don't care if they get the newest PS5 or the nicest bike. They want a loving father. And I think a lot more people need to realize that. And I'm even discredited that because sometimes I'm like, hey, maybe I need to do more, but I need to take a step back and realize, my kids need me more than doing, the extra couple open houses this weekend or running all over Maryland to show properties. I think taking a step back, being beside myself and realize, it's okay to not make money today because being with them is more valuable.
Yeah, I think that work-life balance is so important, and we as men do a terrible job for the most
Yeah.
part of managing that. And I think that's one of the things as I've gotten older now, I think like trying to really recalibrate my work-life balance. I've gotten back into some hobbies that I had when I was younger, and continue to, I've sort of reestablished some of those hobbies. And I think it's important to have time for yourself too. I think that work life balance and being it provides you with some happiness and some joy that's necessary to be a good dad and to be a good employee or a good worker, to be that provider for your family. And I think that provider title needs to be sort of all encompassing. You need to be
Hmm.
able to provide the finances obviously, but the love and care and provide joy to your family as well. I think that's important.
Completely agree, coach. And then I think in closing, if you could talk to either a player or someone you might not even know who's currently struggling in a dark spot, what would be your advice to them to help them get out of the depths and realize that they are loved and that it'll be all right?
Yeah, I think number one, it's hard sometimes to even recognize you're in a bad spot. I think sometimes it's difficult for somebody who's sort of down in a spot that they, maybe haven't experienced before to even realize it and recognize it. So I think listening to other people, and hearing what other people are saying, hey, and if they're asking you questions like, hey, are you doing okay? You don't seem like you're your usual self. I think listening to those people around you. I think also relying on others. I think it's so critical to have and build relationships with others. Whether that be work people but especially just interpersonal relationships. Continue to foster those with your family and friends. And then rely on those people and trust that they're going to provide you what you need. And when they're not, then go seek some help. When they can't, go seek some help. And I think that's critical. I think that it's a big a taboo for men to feel like they can go and speak to somebody about some issues that they're dealing with. And I think that that is a critical mistake that a lot of men make, that we have to be willing to go and talk to other people. We all struggle with things. I've struggled with difficulties in my life, emotional things, anxieties, and finding ways to manage that is really important. And I think talking to others is the first step in helping to solve that.
No, I think that's wonderfully said. And I think as men, we need to get better at that. And that's been my whole purpose of why we're doing this podcast today. And why I'll continue to do them is to let men out there. I don't care if you're the world's strongest man or you're just a normal employee at McDonald's. Everyone is going to be struggling. And I
Yeah,
want people to realize that you're not alone. And I'm here for you. And I know you're here for them. And these conversations are not going to stop. So I just,
great.
why we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And Andy, I love that this project of yours. I think this is an awesome thing you're doing. And I caught up with a few of them. I'm going to watch the rest of them that you've done in the past. So I think you're doing a great thing here. So I appreciate you doing this.
Appreciate it, Coach. God bless you. Talk to you soon. All right.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
God bless.